Every year I try to take advantage of this opportunity to go through with you and kind of bring you up to date on what's happening, this past year since we were all together, and then kind of try to use a crystal ball to give you a feel for what we have coming forward. And my crystal ball just went really fast through some stuff. Sorry about that. I can't lean on the clicker, I just learned that. I'm going to go through just a little bit of this last year, as I said, but most of it is going to be forward-looking. So in 2014, though, as everybody's mentioned, there were a few important things that happened, and Jeff's numbers he just presented are pretty remarkable. When I started doing this in the mid-'80s, there were no legal states you could ship to. So really, there wasn't any money on the table for this that was happening legally. It's great to be able to see an industry that you can see the tangible results of what we've worked on. And the $1.8 billion number is a pretty cool number to be able to talk about. But it is having some consequences, and I think it's important that everybody remember what those are. Some of the other people that are involved, not just the wineries, but our partners in doing this, the third-party providers, as we call them, the regulators are giving lots of scrutiny to those third-party providers. So it's important as wineries that are doing shipping that we work with partners who are following the rules and that everybody understands the system. I think that was one of the biggest things we've found. For example, going into North Dakota, we had to fix the issue of fulfillment houses because they didn't understand in North Dakota really what a fulfillment house was. That they were an agent of the winery. It wasn't somebody doing their own business and shipping. So a lot of this has been educational. If you watch the news, you've seen over the last year, for example, the State Liquor Administration, the SLA in New York, went after Lionstone over their wine clubs, the Wall Street Journal Wine Club, Virgin, Zagat, some of the ones that they were running there, ran into some trouble. I have a feeling there's a few people around who are going to be very pleased to know that Mr. Rosen, who was running the State Liquor Administration, is moving on to run the Medicaid Administration. That was just announced yesterday. So there will be a new director of the State Liquor Authority in New York. But nonetheless, all of this, the partners that we use are important. They're key to our strategies, to our success, but they also are bringing some scrutiny, and they're also giving some ammunition to the people that are the opponents of direct shipping. They're misconstruing in many instances the way these companies work and operate, and they're using it to undermine the efficiency of what it is you're doing. And I'm repeating a couple of these slides from last year because I think it's important that all of you understand who people are talking about, what they're talking about when they say third-party providers. Typically, a third-party provider, in the parlance that we all use this, is somebody who does not hold a license, but they're providing a service to you as a licensee to allow you to get your product from the winery, from the wine club, whatever where it's being generated, the sale, to the consumer. And it's so you don't have to do every single component of that transaction yourself in your winery with the tasting room. It's really, though, important to understand what these third parties can and can't do. One of the things is that you're the person that has to hold the license to be able to do the shipping. If anyone comes to you and says they have the licenses that will allow you to ship into another state, a lot of warning bells should go off for you. Unless they are a licensed retailer to whom you are selling the product, and they then are selling it as a retailer, then there really is no way for someone else to hold a license for them to be able to do something that you otherwise would not be able to do. So you always need to remember that when you're looking at some of these programs to get into other states. The reason for that is that go to jail card in the bottom corner. You're the licensee, so you're the one that will pay the penalty almost every time when that happens. One of the other things that I think there was more scrutiny on this last year wasn't directly related to direct-to-consumer, but regulators have caught on to social media. They're really watching what is being said in social media. I'll just give one good example. Remember, in California, you cannot offer free shipping. There's no free goods. So if you have somewhere in your social media where it says free shipping, that can get you in trouble because you can't say anything in social media that you couldn't say in a printed advertisement. It's a good way to try and remember this, that you need to police your websites to make sure that nothing is being said on there that would put you in violation of any of these other states' rules. Another thing you have to remember is if it's on your website or it's on your Facebook page or something like that, even if it's been posted up there by a consumer, It's your responsibility to police that and make sure there are no statements being made about where your product is available at retailers, things like that, that you couldn't otherwise be making. And that all falls under the California laws that you operate here. So be diligent in watching your social media site to make sure that the people that are posting up there are doing the right things. Simple things. State of Washington, you have to have your Washington direct shipping license number on everything that would look like an advertisement. If you post on Facebook that you're running a sale and that goes into Washington, if you don't have that number down there, you've done a violation. You folks need to be the ones who are monitoring that and making sure that you have control over your social media. Retailer shipping has been in the spotlight again in a way that it hasn't been for a while. I mentioned that Mr. Rosen at the New York State Liquor Authority, there's been ongoing litigation between the Empire Wine Store in Albany and the State Liquor Authority about whether or not the state of New York could shut down Empire from being able to ship. All kinds of states are watching this one. With Mr. Rosen now leaving the SLA, we'll see how this plays out and whether he's still going to pursue his efforts to shut down, or the agency would still go after Empire or not. Nonetheless, it has brought to the fore again these relationships that some of you have chosen to participate in, where you're clearing your wine through in-state retailers, for example, or where simply you're referring people to retailers who are selling wine online. You need to be sure that those retailers are only shipping where they can legally be shipping. And this is a very small pool compared to where you can ship. This is the map of where people who are retailers can ship. And I would remind those of you in the room who hold a Class 1720 combination license here in California as opposed to a Class 02 wine grower's license, this is your list. You might think of yourself as a winery, but other states think of you as a retailer because you don't hold a federal bond and you don't hold a California Class 02 license. So it's a much smaller pool that the people who hold a 1720 license can ship to and get licensed to go into. So a big caution there, and more states are realizing that difference. So you need to pay attention to it. Another thing they're paying more and more attention to are the reports that are filed by the common carriers. Our opponents are also paying attention to those reports, we know, because in some states they're filing requests to get copies of all of the reports that have been filed by some of the common carriers, so they can go through and compare those to what's being filed in the state to make sure that all the people that are shipping hold licenses. So, you know, the idea that nobody's going to notice if I make a shipment is really going out the window, because the common carriers are now filing reports. They're required by statute to file in all of the states that are up here in yellow. They're filing reports in some of the other states voluntarily. So you need to understand that there is a double check out there that's taking place every month where they're comparing the report you filed that said I shipped a case to Susie. There should be a corresponding report from a common carrier that says we carried that shipment from the winery to Susie, and it should match up on the weight. Because if you said it was one bottle, their weight should show that it was also one bottle. So that's the tool the states are using to go in and double check and catch people for making violations, and they are becoming more rigorous about that. One of the things, as I said before, our success is having consequences. $1.8 billion worth of sales is a lot of tax revenue that's on the table right now, and states want that tax revenue. And reasonably, the in-state people who feel they're losing out on those sales, the wholesalers and the retailers that are in those states, are pressuring the state ABCs and the revenue departments to make sure they're collecting that tax so that they don't feel that you are somehow putting them at a disadvantage and there's not a level playing field. So all of those things are things you need to remember, and when people in your leadership perhaps pressure you to do something that you're not comfortable with, remind them that there really are consequences on these, and they can go back to your, ability. You'll lose your license to ship into some of these places. There was another kind of evolution this year. This has been going on for a little while, but it's relatively new and caught a lot of momentum this year. And these are the home delivery buzz from retailers locally. Things like Drizzly and Thirsty and Social, the room service minibar, all of these different, you can get a keg delivered to your house in a half-an-hour notice now, which is, I don't know why you need one. But if you do, you can get one. But the fact that all of these are coming on as delivery services it's blurring what is delivery. You know, these folks aren't coming from a winery, coming across state lines or anything. These are people who are acting as the agent between the local package store and the person at home, and it's happening on their phone. I mean, you just go on your phone and go on Drizzly, and it'll show you a number of brands you can have delivered to your house in under 30 minutes. So regulators, again, are trying to get their arms around all of these new third-party providers and how you work with them, how you understand what they're doing, but it's starting to blur the lines a little bit about what is direct-to-consumer. We don't think of this as direct-to-consumer because this is not crossing a state line, it's not a common carrier, but to the consumer, if he's saying, holding his phone and saying, can I get wine in 30 minutes or can I get it from you in 3 days, it's a little bit less clear. So we just have to kind of stay on top of the rules and roll with them to see, you know, how these things are impacting our traditional idea of direct consumer shipping. The great news is now, with Massachusetts being blue on here, we're up to 90% of the US population, the adult drinking population, are in states that you could ship to them if you have all the requisite licenses to do so. There's still a few of these red ones out there and a couple of ones with hash marks, so I have a job. Jeff, slide. I don't get to retire yet for a little while longer. I'll keep working to try and open up some of those other states, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the good news, again, is the vast majority of the population in the United States now lives somewhere where you can legally ship. And that's been something that Free the Grapes, over all the years we've been working on this, has been working towards. And looking back at 2014, obviously the big story was Massachusetts. This was probably my favorite graphic that came out of the whole media blitz and everything that happened around the Massachusetts shipping thing, was the cartoon that ran. And for those of you who might not be able to read it from the back, it's former Patriots quarterback Drew Bledsoe is saying, this delivery method just isn't working. And, you know, it was great having a partner like Drew Bledsoe stand up and speak for our industry, because he was able to generate so much media attention. And the important thing of having him there was it gave us access to writers and to television time that we never would have had before. And I'm going to jump down to the third bullet point on Massachusetts before I go through the individual rules. This one never would have happened without Free the Grapes. So your attendance here today and your participation over the years you've been doing this have helped us fund the ability for Free the Grapes to do all of the great activities that they have done via social media, via outreach to all of the legislators and the consumers that they have connected over the course of all these years in order to let us open up a state like Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, all of the in-state traditional parts of the industry, the wholesalers, the retailers, everybody, were opposed to us being able to open this up to everyone else. It was, the necessity was that we get the consumers to do an end run around those folks and convince their legislators that this was in their best interest to vote for something that really was a consumer-friendly bill. And Free the Grapes was able to do that through the great work of Jeremy and his team. We had weekly and daily updates and posts that went out to encourage consumers to reach out to specific legislators on specific days, and the work they did to get the good stories into the media back there through the opinion pages and stuff was tremendous. And the media week with Drew Bledsoe, when he was back there, we had to register him as a lobbyist for the Wine Institute. That would have never, I did a lot of things. I never thought I'd be registering a patriot as my lobbyist, but it worked out for a day. But anyway, it's a very tangible effect of the great work that this group has done and that you make possible by attending here today. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that this really is a concrete thing. The Massachusetts law, ultimately the way we were able to overcome a lot of the opposition was to have it included in the state budget. So it was an up or down vote on the entire budget in order to get it through. And that took lots of legwork. And Jeff mentioned earlier Carol Martell, who's my Northeastern counsel. She worked on this nonstop. If you saw the picture earlier today of Drew Bledsoe on the steps of the Capitol, the little blonde woman who was standing behind him is Carol. And she loved being on the front of the Boston Globe with him in that picture. But also, she just did a great amount of work and a great job on this one. The new law fixes the problems that were there from Family Winemakers versus Jenkins, which was the capacity cap, the ability. They had a consumer aggregate limit that said no consumer could receive more than a certain amount, and from a group of wineries, and there was no way you ever would have known whether they'd already filled out their aggregate amount, and you would have been guilty of a felony if you went over it. So there are all kinds of things that had to be fixed, and they have been fixed. So effective January 1st, actually the law took effect. We do know people have now started to receive some of their licenses. To get that license, it's a $300 initial payment, and it's going to be $150 a year to renew. So there's a filing fee and an upfront payment, and then the renewals in years out will be $150. Each winery can now ship up to 12 cases per customer per year. You have to register online with the Department of Revenue in order to pay the excise tax. There is no sales tax on alcohol in the state of Massachusetts, so that's one you don't have to worry about. It's taking them somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks, we believe, to process the licenses. Like I say, some people have started to get their licenses back. One thing they were very clear about is nobody should be doing any solicitation or taking any orders until their license is effective. Under their rules back there, they would consider that working, taking sales, making sales without a license. So if you don't have your license yet, I see a few people around the room cringing, be very careful. You should not be doing any public solicitation before you get your license in hand. FedEx Ground and FedEx Express have agreed to open up the state. As of February 1st, they had to be approved by the state. That has taken place. They've done all their due diligence. That is huge, because we could have had the state open until we get a common carrier to work with us on it, then it wasn't viable. This is going to make it viable for folks beginning on February 1st. There are a couple of tedious, I would say at the least, requirements. You do have to attach a copy of a vote by your board of directors, and your manager is appointing an individual to be the person that is the manager of this program. All of the in-state licensees have to do something similar, because this is the person that will be served if there is any violation. So what they're doing is they're identifying one person to whom any kind of troubling correspondence, basically, would be addressed. The other thing, and this is one that a number of people have said has been tedious for some of the larger corporations, is that you have to provide a notice of all the limited partners, and you have to note any interests they have in other licenses. The goal for this, Massachusetts, like many other states, has what they call a tight house law, where somebody who owns an upper tier license can't own another license. So a supplier cannot own a retail license or a wholesale license in the state of Massachusetts. Other states have what they call a de minimis rule. Texas, I believe it's 10%. So if somebody doesn't own more than 10% of your company, then you don't have to worry about what they do. Massachusetts has no bottom line. So what they're trying to determine is whether any of your partners are the people who own a license in Massachusetts. So if you had a partner who held a restaurant license in the state of Massachusetts, we believe you would not be eligible to get a license to ship into the state of Massachusetts, because that would violate the tight house law. So that's what that part of the request is for. All of the in-state licensees have to go through a similar type of vetting process, and this is now coming over to us. And the last thing is you have to have a confirmation of your Food and Drug Administration registration. Since 2012, every winery has had to register as an FDA facility, so you simply have to include that. That's the basics of what it is, what it's taking to get into Massachusetts. Again, if you have specific questions on that, Annie Bones is here from my office. Annie, stand up, wave. If you're a member of the Wine Institute, she's your best resource on any kind of labeling or licensing, registration, or label brand registration, whatever it's going to be. She talks with the folks at all of these agencies on a regular basis and can walk you through the process. And also all the application forms and everything are available on our website, and she keeps all of those up to date. I want to go through a couple other things from 2014 too. Arizona, there was a push to take away the ability of out-of-state wineries over 20,000 gallons to do on-site sales. Currently, you don't qualify for the off-premise license because you're bigger than the folks who can get the shipping license, but you can do on-site sales. The good news is that in the end, we were able to protect that. And that's 2 cases per calendar year per consumer, and they have to be visiting there at the winery in order to do that. But it's one small exception that a lot of wineries take advantage of. They did try to take that away last year, and we were able to protect that. So that was a good success. One of the things I urge you to do on any of these states that I'm going to mention that have an on-site requirement, you do need to keep some kind of bookkeeping because they do audits. So have something that shows that they were there. A signature page, any kind of documentation that they might sign while they were there, something other than just the register receipt that has no signature on it, that would be the same thing you would have if it's a remote sale. That's what's going to get you in trouble. Some states suggest that you get a copy of their driver's license. We actually don't think that's a great idea. For privacy reasons, you don't want a bunch of people's driver's license sitting around in a drawer, perhaps. Your decision, but that's one you might want to think about. Another state where, question? The Arizona statute says that the person who is there visiting is supposed to buy for themselves. So technically, it's not for you to ship to somebody who's not there. Because it's for personal use and not consumption of the purchaser, is how they've claimed it. Annie also worked really closely with Georgia this year. They went through a very tedious transition from paper licenses over to online licensing, and they had to reclassify all the wineries over from their old categories to be now either classified as a winery or a farm winery. If you haven't yet gone through this process, I would suggest, if you're a member especially, that you give Annie a call. She can help walk you through that. It has been a challenge for some of the wineries who went through a period where they were not licensed because they didn't get the transition done. But the good news is we've been able to work out most of the kinks in the Georgia licensing system as they went over to their online system. Maine is another state where we actually made some progress last year. One of the goals we've had is to try and make monthly and, make compliance easier for you. And that means trying to go to less frequent reports and less agencies that you have to file reports with. In Maine, we transitioned from quarterly tax reports to an annual tax. The argument we use with the states is that, some of these wineries are filing very small checks on a monthly or quarterly basis. Let's go with an annual report so that you have less processing costs at the state level. The wineries also obviously have less processing cost if they're only doing an annual report versus a monthly report. So we will continue to try to get these in other states, but in Maine, excuse me, we did get this transition done. The one interesting thing in the change in Maine that you need to pay attention to is the annual reporting period now is the annual period of your license. It's no longer the calendar year. So you have to make sure that when your license comes up for renewal, that's when you need to file your report for Maine. So those are all places great things happen, but we kept trying in a bunch of other states that things didn't happen in 2014. So I'm going to come back and work on a number of these in 2015. But as you can see, there are 8 states where you currently can't ship. We had bills in 6 of those. Indiana already has a law. We were trying to make it better. But 6 of the other states we did have bills in 2014, and we'll have a number of those around again in 2015. So real quickly, let me go through what we see for 2015, and then you can go have lunch and think about it all. Pennsylvania. This is one we had hoped to get in 2014, and we made a lot of progress. We got a bill through the House. It didn't pass it through the Senate. We got caught up in Pennsylvania with the entire fight of Governor Corbett, who was the outgoing governor, he is now gone, had made privatizing the entirety of the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board one of his high priorities. He was not successful in that, and it was a very big fight in the legislature for the course of the whole year. All of the alcohol bills got caught up in that fight. Ours was one, and we were not able to move it separately without that. There is a new governor who has been elected. He is not a proponent of full privatization, but he has been very clear that he is a proponent of modernizing the existing system in Pennsylvania. And one thing that everybody has agreed on, the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, members of the legislature, and us, is that direct consumer shipping is a key part of that modernization. So we're actually going into the legislative session with the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board supporting legislation to modernize. Even more surprising is we have folks that are now saying they could support a bill that could have a 12% flat tax rate, which is much better. We started out at 24% when they started looking at this a year ago. So had they passed the bill that they had moved last year, it would have been 24%, and that really would have been, I think, a business killer. But 12% is down in the right rate because you'll note there will be no excise tax or other sales tax. This would be a flat rate that would go in lieu of the sales and excise tax, which puts it almost in line with states like Wyoming and New Hampshire and stuff that are also the other control states. So we're making progress. We expect the bill to be introduced in the first quarter. We're cautiously optimistic that it could even move in the first quarter because some of the people want to get these alcohol bills just off the desk. So this is one we have a lot of focus on this year, and we're going to be working on it. Annie's family all lives in Pennsylvania, so I hear about this a lot. So anyway, we're going to make a good effort on this, and we have a good team in place to work on it, and it's one I hope you can talk about next year. As Jeff said, the numbers are different. It's 4.5% of the total population. The demographics aren't as good, but it's obviously the other big ticket that's hanging out there for us as we go forward. The next big ticket, well, not really, Delaware. It's a much smaller state. We had a bill last year that made a little bit of progress. It got bottled up, but this year we're going to come back. We have leadership in both the House and the Senate that have agreed to sponsor the bill. This is one we're cautiously optimistic on. It's not a huge market, as you know, but again, it's one of those, it's just keeping the momentum up and keep adding markets. There is some money in Delaware too, so it's one that we would, I think it would be a good one to get. So we're going to make a good push for it this year. We'll be working with Jeremy and the folks at Free the Grapes on this one too. The current status, just to remind you, this is a state where shipping is prohibited except it's part of that federal on-site rule that is out there that still impacts the states of Delaware, Oklahoma, and South Dakota, where if somebody is visiting at your winery, you can ship back to them what they could have carried on their person, and there is no limit on how much you can ship back into Delaware if they are visiting at the winery. The consumer is responsible for paying the taxes on that when they get home. But just know that that is one that is, we're hopeful to be able to get fixed this year. A big focus for us in addition to Pennsylvania this year is going to be South Dakota. We had hoped to get this one in 2014. We had a bill that passed out of the Senate, but we got killed in the House in the last days of the session last year. They had a summer study over this, and that was very contentious and lots of media attention to it. The great news is that the 8 members of the Senate or of the Summer Study Committee voted 8-0 to move forward this piece of legislation that we're going to now be looking at. So this is now not Wine Institute putting forward a bill. This is going to be the Summer Study. So it's 8 legislators, many of whom are in leadership, putting forward a bill. So that gives us some momentum. Jeremy and I will be talking tomorrow morning with our lobbyists in South Dakota, figuring out some social media things that we need to do because we're going to get a hearing coming up in the next few days in South Dakota. Currently, South Dakota is another one of these states under that federal rule, so they get the 1 gallon per visit. I know lots of you sell in gallons. These rules have obviously been around for a while, but anyway, so South Dakota, we are optimistic, is another one that we may get this year. Indiana is a fix-it bill state. Many of you are shipping into Indiana, but if you have a wholesaler in Indiana, you're not. There's a provision in Indiana law that says if you have a wholesaler, you cannot get a direct-to-consumer shipper's license. So we're running a bill that will get rid of that component. It would also get rid of the initial face-to-face requirement. Indiana has a rule that the first time you sell to somebody, they have to have been at the winery. After that, if you are small enough and could get the license, you could make additional shipments. So what we're trying to do is get rid of those 2 components of the law, so it would make it workable for all the wineries across the country, not just the wineries that don't have a wholesaler in Indiana. There'll be a hearing on that bill next Wednesday. That's the other assignment for Jeremy and I tomorrow morning, is to sit down with our lobbyists in Indiana to get some social media and some media pressure up on this. So that's what we do. That's how your support of Free the Grapes works, is we go in, work with our local lobbying teams to tailor specific messages for each state so that the legislators are hearing from their local constituents. Their folks who live in their district will hear from us via Facebook to call Senator X, Y, or Z and say, hey, don't listen to the wholesaler or the retailer who doesn't like this. Listen to me. I vote for you, and we want you to support this bill. New Jersey is another place we're going to try and do a fix-it bill. They have a capacity cap of 250,000 gallons that we would like to get removed. We also would like to remove a requirement that says anyone who's a corporation or an LLC has to pay corporate taxes to the state of New Jersey for all of the business you're doing there. That's the only state that goes after corporate taxes in addition to sales and excise taxes. So we're looking at an author to run that bill in 2015. This is the second year of a session in New Jersey, so that may give us an opportunity to get a bill through. Illinois. There are 24 lucky wineries in California who are on a list of being sued by an attorney in Illinois for failure to collect sales tax on the cost of shipping into the state of Illinois. This is a very murky and confusing set of litigation, and get up and do a little dance right now if you're not one of those 24 people. But it's one that we're going to work on to try and get fixed so that it's not going to happen to people in the future. But I'm not going to put this on a slide because the slides are going to be published, but I'll tell you this. If you get an order that's to be shipped to the law firm of Shad, Diamond, and Shedden in the city of Chicago on Michigan Avenue, don't ship it. Stephen Diamond is an attorney in Chicago who has been making a living over the last several years suing out-of-state companies that are making shipments into Illinois. What happens is they goes after these companies, and it's been big companies for the most part in the past, people like the Home Shopping Network and Walmart and Walgreens, you know, who have done lots of shipments into the state, saying that, you know, under Illinois law, it is very confusing about whether or not you should be collecting sales tax on the cost of shipping. The easiest way to avoid this going forward is, and any winery who's been doing this in the past is fine, is to have the cost of shipping included in the price of the transaction. If that's how you've done it, you've been charging sales tax on the entirety of the transaction, and it's perfectly clear there is no further obligation there. What has happened is, where it gets murky, the Department of Revenue has a different interpretation than this lawyer and the judge about if your person has to negotiate the price of their sales tax separately, meaning they order the wine, then they go over and figure out the cost of shipping, whether or not you should be paying that, the taxes on that part. Can I get my water bottle real quick? I'm sorry. So that's the part that is under review. We're going to be working on a piece of legislation to fix that. Sorry, everybody. We're working with local folks, with the retail merchants and others in Illinois to get past this. But for the moment, you need to probably, I would urge you to have your attorneys just look at your website and make sure how you've put it together and compare that to the statutory requirement in Illinois about whether you want to be collecting and paying these sales taxes. Because for the people that are going to court, they are going after a considerable amount of money. So just a word of caution. And again, the name of the law firm is Shad, S-C-H-A-D, Diamond, and Shedden, S-H-E-D-D-E-N. And I've never seen any of you people before in my life. The other things we're going to do as we work going forward, I mentioned that we're going to try and open up new states. We're going to try and fix the problems like this in Illinois, like the capacity caps in Indiana, the frequency of reporting. Those are all the things that are going to be the ongoing work of Wine Institute and Free the Grapes and others as we go forward. We're also going to work closely with the carriers as we had in the past to make sure that everybody is providing the states with accurate reporting in a way that'll let the states be comfortable with our program of shipping. This is too big and too important of a channel of commerce for us not to do it right now. We need to protect the rules that we have out there so we can continue to sell that $1.8 billion worth of wine. And we have to have the support of the states in order to do that. Right now, this is what the map looks like. I hope it'll get a little more blue. We'll keep working on that. Just a quick reminder, these are the federal states. I just mentioned those. That's the one exception for the on-site. And I always try to end with this. There are some states out there you just can't be doing direct-to-consumer shipping to. that if somebody comes to you with a magic bullet and says, I can ship to somebody's house in Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, or Utah, it's a really good test to realize that that might not be somebody you want to be doing business with. And you can always tell them to call me and explain it to me, and if they're right, I'll get back to you. But as of yet, I haven't found anybody that can give me a good way they could be doing this unless they're working through local retailers. In some of these states, even the local retailer aspect isn't an option.